other print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Jackie, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Sunday, February 15th issue of the New York Times business section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Maybe America needs some new cities. It's been done before and may just help solve the housing crisis, by Conor Dougherty. There is a large picture of very tall buildings closely built together. Looks like a busy city. And the caption reads, "A single company planned most of the parks, streets, and structures in Irvine, California," which is what this picture is of. Building homes and businesses on vacant land. And then there's another photo that shows an ad from a newspaper that says a 1975 ad in the Los Angeles Times promotes developments by the Irvine Company. The lure of new cities built from scratch. America needs more housing. Some thinkers and investors call for whole communities. By Conor Dougherty. Irvine, California. A popular knock on Orange County is that it is a mass of indistinguishable neighborhoods designed for the efficient placement of tract homes. But few miles down the road from Disneyland, smack in the center of the country, lies a subtle refutation of sprawl-like growth. The city is Irvine, population 300,000 or so. On the surface, it looks like a typical American suburb, with curlicue streets and shopping centers abundant in parking. What makes Irvine unique is that, unlike most of its neighbors, it also has a dense base of employment that includes a university, manufacturing, and high-rise office buildings. In other words, it's a true city. This happened fast, and not organically. Almost all of Irvine was built by a single entity, the Irvine Company, which for most of its 160-year history was a grain and citrus farming operation. The company started developing this farmland during California's post-World War II boom, and in the late 70s was taken over by a group of investors that included Donald Bren. Bren, 93, is now the sole owner and one of the country's richest people, thanks to Irvine's growth. The company planned most of Irvine's parks, streets, and structures, and it continues to own a majority of the city's apartments, shopping centers, and offices, even a local newspaper. Almost no place in America is more completely a company town. As the country grapples with a housing shortage, Irvine's model has gained a new appeal. And expand businesses than building new urban areas on vacant land without the complexities of an existing city? This is a more efficient way to produce homes. Enticed by the potential profits and eager to have more control over their footprint, investors and businesses are backing new town and city concepts that, like Irvine, are guided by a private hand. Some of the plans are dead serious, others fanciful. Perhaps not surprisingly, their most enthusiastic proponents tend to be technology billionaires. Take, for instance, Starbase, Texas, a newly incorporated city that has clusters of employee housing built around manufacturing and launch facilities owned by SpaceX, Elon Musk's rocket company. Starbase, which encompasses about 1.5 square miles near the Mexican border, is one of several attempts to use Texas's abundant land and loose development laws to seed startup communities with names like Prototown and Austinnople. Back in California, a group of Silicon Valley moguls are pursuing something much grander. A proposal to build a city of 400,000 people on top of rolling hills an hour north of San Francisco. At the moment, those hills are occupied by sheep farms and wind turbines. California Forever, the company behind the project, has spent about $1 billion acquiring 70,000 acres of farmland and put forth a plan to build a walkable community with nearby manufacturing and shipbuilding facilities. There is, of course, a big difference between declaring an intent to build a whole city and doing it. In 2021, Mark Lowry, the billionaire founder of the shopping portal Jet.com, announced Telosa, which is imagined as a desert city of 5 million people. Lowry's aim is to upend the economics of land use. A foundation would manage development and lease land to residents and businesses, who would own the buildings. Telosa has a small team of employees and consultants, and a website with animations of elevated trams cruising past pedestrian-friendly streets. It has also yet to acquire land, so for now, it's more utopian dream than real-life destination. These efforts might seem kooky if the drive for new cities wasn't also gaining support from influential policy minds. The economists Paul M. Romer, a Nobel laureate and professor at Boston College, and Edward L. Glaser of Harvard have promoted the new city concept in the United States and abroad. At the same time, urbanists are organizing pop-up villages and designing car-light and even car-free neighborhoods. About a year after the California Forever project was revealed, Devin Zugel, a software engineer, announced a proposal for a new neighborhood in the Sonoma County city of Cloverdale. The project is called Esmeralda. Esmeralda, which borrows heavily from the new urbanist movement, is planned for a site where the city had earlier approved a golf course neighborhood dotted with large, single-family homes and ample yards. Zugel's hope is to execute a kind of planning U-turn. Esmeralda's ambition is to build 605 higher-density homes with front porches and bike-friendly streets, all linked to shops, offices, and hotel rooms by walkways and a community plaza. Even the biggest of these projects is tiny compared with new city ideas in the rest of the world. There is nothing to match the scale and hubris of, say, Neom, the $500 billion city that Saudi Arabia hopes will diversify its oil-dependent economy, or the dozens of new cities in Asia whose stock of empty buildings makes them seem both impressive and like a good way to go broke. During his 2024 campaign, President Trump announced his intent to create freedom cities that would be constructed on federal land and reignite American imagination by embracing innovations like flying vehicles that take off and land vertically. But as president, he has not offered much of a blueprint and has instead mostly pushed ideas to allow prospective homebuyers to take on more debt. However it happens, America needs more housing. Economists estimate the current shortage at somewhere between 4 million and 7 million units, which would take several decades to build at the current pace of construction. The easiest way to increase those numbers is to build more housing on the urban edge, where land and construction are less expensive. The unifying thesis of projects like California Forever and Esmeralda is to use the logic of sprawl-style growth. build on undeveloped land outside city centers to create neighborhoods that aim to minimize the use of cars. When I look around America and I see what's being built, I have a hard time finding places I want to live, said Zugel, the chief executive of Esmeralda. I'm not thrilled about the idea of raising kids in a city like San Francisco, where it would be hard to have independence at a young age. At the same time, I don't want to live in a car-centric suburb where you can't walk to a store. Open land represents the future in its purest form. After all, every place was no place at some point. The quest for resources, escaping bondage, or seeking places to worship freely have all motivated new settlements and fresh modes of living. Buildings, sure, but also a chance to improve society in a place where the future looms larger than the past. We're trying to create a place that will someday have all the messiness and complexity that real cities have, said Gabriel Metcalf, the head of planning for California Forever. The word city is an expression of that ambition. But every idea needs a model, and in the United States, it's hard to find a more successful one than Irvine. The weekday drive from Los Angeles to Orange County is choked with traffic and rimmed by strip malls. On a recent morning, I made the slog to meet Michael Stockstill, a former employee of the Irvine Company and co-author, with H. Pike Oliver, of Transforming the Irvine Ranch, the definitive history of Irvine and its post-World War II transformation. Over the next few hours, Stockstill drove me around while narrating the city's history. Calling my attention to the absence of billboards and power lines, they're underground, and to the presence of a thick canopy of trees, he was in essence pointing to the benefits of corporate planning. In 1960, when what is now Irvine was mostly farms, the sprawl of Los Angeles was seeping southward into Orange County, Stockstill said. Most of the region's landowners sold off their land piecemeal, a couple of hundred acres here, a couple of hundred acres there. Builders then proceeded to throw up tight rows of one-story homes with minimal landscaping and nothing but a token sidewalk separating them from the street. Irvine would get filled with homes eventually. The pressures of growth had faded it. But because the ranch's 100,000 or so acres had been held by the same family for a century, it had the power to decide how it happened. Early ads in newspapers touted innovative planning, where everything seems to fit together. Stockstill relayed an anecdote about how Irvine's lead architect and designer would show employees photographs of Los Angeles's Fernando Valley, point to features like gaudy billboards and cinder block sound walls and say, "It's not going to look like this." Irvine was part of a new town movement in the 60s and 70s, which included the cities of Reston, Virginia, Columbia, Maryland, both outside Washington, as well as the Woodlands, Texas, near Houston. Demand for housing was exploding as members of the baby boom generation moved into their home buying years. Cookie-cutter subdivisions sprouted to meet the demand, but they were so uniform and ugly that planners and developers began seeking alternatives. Most of the new town developments were lovingly landscaped with curved streets and trees and amenities like parks and pools. They also tried to create a degree of self-sufficiency by mixing commercial and residential development. To jumpstart its economy, Irvine donated 1,000 acres for a new University of California campus. Then it built housing for the university and other employers, creating a flywheel that attracted more businesses, more employees, more housing, and so on. Having housing for all segments of your workforce is attractive to bigger companies, said Ann Forsyth, a professor of urban planning at Harvard and co-director of the school's New Towns Initiative. A developer who stays involved with a project has a greater stake in maintaining schools and public safety, which raise real estate values and attract more residents than the typical developer who builds a project and moves on. And the possibility to make money over decades instead of all at once is an incentive to think more holistically about what neighborhoods should look like, rather than bowing to the concerns of individual buyers. Irvine is frequently described as a wealthy suburb, and its per capita income far outranks any other large city in the country. But contrary to the suburban stereotype, its neighborhoods are layered with a diversity of single-family homes and multi-unit buildings. By building homes and apartments near each other from the outset, the Irvine Company was able to avoid, or at least tamp down, the not-in-my-backyard objections that arise anytime existing residents are asked to accept a larger building, Stockstill said. Concentrated power does, of course, have problems. The Irvine Company owns so much of the city's apartment stock that tenants have accused it of being a monopoly that keeps prices artificially high. During Irvine's first city council meeting in 1972, a clerk accidentally referred to it as a gathering of the City of the Irvine Company, according to Stockstill's book. Several decades later, the company's influence over local politics remains vast. Despite its planning successes, Irvine remains every bit as car-centric as the sprawl its creators wanted to get away from. My tour of the city included no saunter down a main street. We walked across a parking lot to an In-N-Out burger for lunch, but not much more. The car won, and that's the story of Southern California, Stockstill said. A great idea with many risks. While Irvine thrived, the movement it was a part of did not. Since 1960, there have been several dozen attempts to create new town communities, most of which have failed to attract more than a few thousand residents. In 1970, when Congress passed the Urban Growth and New Community Development Act, it included a program to give loan guarantees to developers who built new towns that were economically diverse and contained a mix of jobs as well as housing. But that program was shut down in 1983 after funding 13 new communities, almost all of which were financial failures. The exception was The Woodlands. The idea that you can conceive of a city that addresses all of the ills of the current city is philosophically a wonderful goal, said Richard Pizer, a professor of real estate development at Harvard, who directs the New Towns Initiative with Forsyth. I've spent a lifetime trying to understand why most new towns are not very good. Every development is risky. A whole city is extraordinarily so. To make undeveloped land livable, a developer first has to shoulder the expense of securing and building a water supply, not to mention power lines, sewer pipes, and other infrastructure. A project that takes many years and consumes potentially billions in losses before the first home is built. The more daunting hurdle is attracting enough jobs to create an economic base, since people want to live within a reasonable distance of their work. People come to a new city because of the people who are there, not because of infrastructure, said Elaine Bertraud, a senior researcher at New York University, who spent much of his career advising the creation of new cities for the World Bank. That, Bertraud said, is why America's most successful new cities in the post-war era are on the edge of bustling places where outward growth was already underway. There is no Reston without Washington, no Woodlands without Houston, and no Irvine without Los Angeles. Each of them relied on finding just the right parcel in just the right place at just the right moment. And even then, it's more alchemy than science. The staying power of old cities isn't that they're perfect or easy to live in, but that they have an intellectual and cultural heft that is impossible to replicate. New ideas have come from somewhere, and a blank slate is a stark way to showcase them. Their true power isn't in finding the perfect expression, it's in the ways they get copied. From that angle, Irvine is much more than a mid-sized city in the orbit of Los Angeles. Its Mediterranean-style architecture has been cloned all across the United States. And many of its planning ideas, like targeting a range of residents from college graduates seeking first apartments to empty nesters downsizing, are so baked into the suburban landscape that newer generations of developers consider them the standard. Randall Lewis, a principal at the Lewis Group of Companies, a developer of master-planned communities in California and Nevada, said he visited Irvine a minimum of 3 times a year to get ideas. It's the number one source by far, he said. Developers can be a conservative bunch because their projects are literally set in stone, in wood and bricks and asphalt. Once a new concept is proven, the industry looks to replicate it across the country. Cookie cutter, you might say. It makes sense financially, but leaves minimal oxygen for new concepts, and creates a logic in which suburbs look like the suburbs because that's how suburbs are built. In the United States, where real estate is ultimately about profit and loss, the best way to bend the paradigm is to prove something different can be lucrative. But first, you have to build it. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times business section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Crises everywhere, but the markets don't seem to mind. By Jeff Summer. Stocks have prospered while the world is plunged into disorder, an economist says. The world sometimes seems to be lurching into a state of permanent crisis, but no matter. Despite occasional setbacks, the stock market is booming. This dissonance between real-world distress and glorious financial wealth is a permanent feature of the markets, not a bug. Markets have prospered through civil unrest, pandemic, glaring racial inequity, recession, severe unemployment, tattered alliances, tariff conflicts, and outright war. To set off a boom, all that is needed are enough people believing they can make money. Plenty of people believe that now. The Dow rose above 50,000 this month, and Wall Street is bullish. Ignoring world crises is a smart strategy for investors until, at some point, the markets themselves fall into crisis. At a time like this, the best investors may be able to do is to keep calm and carry on, said Eswar S. Prasad, an economist at Cornell and the Brookings Institution. Carry on, but be prepared for reversals. Don't forget that there is danger lurking. For the past few years, Professor Prasad has immersed himself in studying global danger. He's come out with an ambitious book that provides an up-to-date model for the toxic mix of economic, social, and political disruption afflicting the world. The book is called The Doom Loop: Why the World Economic Order is Spiraling into Disorder. We chatted about these problems for a couple of hours recently. The book isn't cheerful reading. We had a disturbing and mind-bending conversation. Surveying the havoc. How bad is the current situation? I don't want to ruin your day, but this chat didn't help mine. Booming financial markets aside, Professor Prasad said major world problems are feeding one another in a vicious circle. He calls this social, political, and economic vortex a doom loop. If it helps, remember your gains in the fabulous stock market before considering the disconcerting global backdrop. A former International Monetary Fund official, Professor Prasad, talked about the battered trend known as globalization. A system of free trade and commerce and global supply chains that knitted much of the world together, it lifted the status of desperately poor people in countries like India and China, but caused hardship in industrial regions of nations like France, Germany, Britain, Italy, Japan, and the United States. That already looks like the distant past. In no small part because of President Trump, Professor Prasad said, the system is being shredded. So are multilateral institutions that had worked to ensure some degree of world peace and stability. I would include the IMF, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, and the United Nations in that list. At the same time, he said, political turmoil in many global countries is fueling a breakdown in global economic and political relations. For example, the Trump administration's widening immigration crackdown, which has kindled domestic unrest, is often seen in other countries as an integral part of America First policies that are shattering illusions of a global cohesion. And anti-immigrant sentiment is rife in other countries. This is all part of the doom loop, he said. The war between Russia and Ukraine grinds on. The last nuclear arms control treaty between Russia and the United States has expired. China is rushing to acquire a bigger arsenal. Europe is discussing the creation of its own larger deterrent force. And countless smaller powers are grasping for nuclear arms if they don't already have them. The possibility of direct conflict between the United States and China in the Taiwan Strait or the South China Sea can't be ruled out. Follow the money. Professor Prasad sees the economy as the ultimate source of power. Therefore, the United States and China are superpowers in his view. Russia, with an economy ranked smaller than Brazil's, is not. It remains a potent military force, however, endangering much of Europe and retaining the capacity to wreak destruction anywhere on the planet. Traditional U.S. allies in Europe, and indeed on all other continents, have been forced to realize that they can't count unconditionally on a Trump-led United States. Thanks largely to the Trump tariffs, the old free trade system is devolving into a series of incipient trade wars, inflaming other conflicts. Mr. Trump is using tariffs to inflict punishment, or reward acquiescence, on issues unrelated to trade itself. Greenland, immigration, the flow of drugs. When countries oppose the president's demands, he imposes more tariffs. Douglas Irwin, a Dartmouth economist who is an expert on the history of trade, told me in a phone conversation that using tariffs this way is just extraordinary in U.S. history. In our conversation, Professor Prasad, who, like me, is an old China hand, said China shared responsibility for the breakdown in global commercial relations. It is causing immense harm by flooding the world with more experts than most nations can easily absorb, he said. China has long needed to tilt its economy toward domestic consumption, which would make it less reliant on aggressive experts for growth, but has been unable or unwilling to do so. China's internal repression, its increasingly autocratic leadership, and its often punitive international aid and trade terms make its economic and political model unpalatable to many countries. But today, Professor Prasad said, the United States is no paragon either. There's a looming danger that the United States and China will slice much of the world into blocks, with middle and smaller powers forced to navigate as best they can between the superpowers. The world outlook depicted in the doom loop is overwhelmingly bleak. And yet, those earnings. Still, for investors, there is the cheering reality that many markets have been splendid. Big tech companies in the United States are churning out enormous profits while spending staggering sums on the development of artificial intelligence. Investors may be worried, but they're thriving. After the Dow Jones Industrial Average reached 50,000 for the first time on February 6th, Edward Yardeni, an economist and strategist with a bullish bent, reiterated that he expected the Dow to reach 70,000, a 40% gain by 2029. Mr. Yardeni has been talking for a long time about, as he puts it, the roaring 2020s stock market. AI will increase productivity throughout the economy and generate broad-based earnings improvements, he said, and that will keep the bull market going. Many stock markets elsewhere are outperforming the market in the United States. The falling dollar has helped to bolster international returns, especially, but not solely, for those investing in dollars. Professor Prasad, an expert on the dollar, expects that the U.S. currency, for better and for worse, will remain the dominant means of global exchange, though many other countries are trying to avoid it. Despite problems lately in speculative markets like commodities and cryptocurrency, the global financial system so far is holding steady. Even so, Professor Prasad said, complacency would be unwise. There's real trouble right now, he said, even if it's not showing up in portfolio returns. We are seeing that the institutions are getting shredded, he said. We're seeing domestic politics becoming even more polarized and infected in a way that is having a very negative effect on geopolitics as well. Financial markets were calm in the years leading up to the great financial crisis and recession of December 2007 through June 2009. The doom loop now, he said, may well plague the markets later. So don't relax too much, Professor Prasad said. I think that it's a good time, when things appear to be good, to worry a little more about all these unfavorable dynamics lurking under the surface. He shrugged, with a rueful grin. This is cheerful stuff, no? Well, no. It's depressing to contemplate, but the world is in a difficult place. I think it's worth pondering all of this carefully. For investors, it makes sense, as I've been writing, to buffer your stock holdings with bonds and cash if you're likely to need your money soon. In a review of The Doom Loop, The Economist praised the book's sweeping analytical power, but said it came up short on solutions. That was true of my conversation with Professor Prasad as well, but I don't fault him. Without major political shifts, it's hard to see how to turn around the global situation. Ordinary people will need to try to protect themselves as institutions fray. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times business section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. $4.8 billion. That's Ford Motors' losses on electric vehicles in 2025. Ford Motor quickly established itself as a major maker of electric vehicles, rolling out 3 models a few years ago. But its big bet has proved costly. Ford said on Tuesday that its electric vehicle business lost $4.8 billion in 2025, and that it expected to lose another $4 billion to $4.5 billion this year. The New York Times' Neil E. Boudet reported. Electric vehicles, which are generally more expensive than gas-powered and hybrid models, have not sold as well as car makers expected. Republicans in Congress have rolled back Biden-era tax incentives that reduced the cost of electric vehicles, and the Trump administration is taking steps to gut clean air rules. As a result, car makers are finding that selling more big gas-powered cars, especially trucks and sport utility vehicles, is the most profitable approach, Jack Ewing reported. In detailing its losses last week, Ford joined General Motors and Stellantis, which have also announced multi-billion-dollar electric vehicle losses. In December, Ford said it was scaling back its electric vehicle ambitions, including scrapping its F-150 Lightning pickup truck. It will instead make a version of the truck that uses a gasoline engine to charge the truck's batteries. Sherry House, Ford's chief financial officer, said the company would continue losing money on electric vehicles for a couple more years. We are now targeting break-even around 2029, she said Tuesday. Overall, the car maker lost $11.1 billion in the fourth quarter and $8.2 billion for all of 2025. Ford's losses would have been much higher if not for profits in other divisions, including the one that makes internal combustion vehicles. By Laura Kelly. Sunicorn. As venture capital funding pours into startups, large and small, more firms are pitching themselves as the next big thing. This is in Shop Talk by Laura Kelly. Once upon a time, becoming a unicorn, a private startup worth more than $1 billion, was a founder's dream. The term was coined by Aileen Lee, founder and partner at Cowboy Ventures, in 2013, to signify the rarity of billion-dollar valuations at the time. But today, more than 1,000 of them exist, and the world of corns has broadened to include decacorns, private companies valued at $10 billion or more, hectacorns, worth more than $100 billion. There is even a word for startups that pitch themselves as poised to become the next crop of unicorns, sunicorns. These companies, backed by venture capital and worth $500 million to $999 million at a post-money valuation, can tell us a lot about the startup world and where it's heading, said Ilya A. Strublev, a Stanford professor with an expertise in finance and venture capital. There are now dramatically more sunicorns in the United States than 10 years ago, he added, noting that by the end of last year, more than 2,000 companies had reached that status. Though Dr. Strublev said he did not invent the term, he has emerged as a prominent user. Dr. Strublev expects 2026 to be a big year for sunicorns, partly because the artificial intelligence craze has lowered the barriers to receiving funding at heady valuations. Investors are pouring capital into new projects, making it relatively easy to start a company, especially compared with fallow days in the early 2020s. Some firms founded a couple years ago may hit sunicorn status this year, and others may even nab first rounds of funding that value them at $500 million or more right away. Despite the soon in the name, Dr. Strublev said sunicorns will not necessarily go on to become unicorns, the term which cropped up in the past decade and is sometimes used by founders, investors, the news media, and academics like him, is more about capturing the status of a company at a moment in time than predicting its future. Some sunicorns may end up going public at a lower valuation, and some may keep humming along at not quite unicorn status. Others, of course, may fail altogether, as so many startups do. But for now, sunicorns are proliferating, and this year's hot ones may not even exist yet. Lately, many VC-backed companies scale much faster, Dr. Strublev said. Before 2015, it took about 6.5 years on average to hit unicorn status. Over the past decade, his research has found it has taken companies closer to 3.5 years. And big startups now often stay private for longer. 20 years ago, a buzzy startup may have jumped at the first chance for an exit. Now, public markets are somewhat jittery, and some mature startups have spent years ballooning in value, taking advantage of the relative privacy of remaining, well, private. That too may change in 2026. The mega startups, Anthropic, OpenAI, and SpaceX, all hectacorns, are reportedly taking steps to go public this year. And so the corn herd evolves. Trouble sleeping? Time to troubleshoot. Try these tools and techniques to make sharing a bed better for everyone. By Dori Shevlin. Sharing a bed can be a wonderful experience for you and your partner. Snuggly, sexy, serene. But many of us are likely to be familiar with the alternative situations. Shivering and exposed after your partner tears away the duvet, unable to sleep over their lawnmower loud snoring, or failing to disable your alarm clock before your beloved night owl rouses too early and none too pleased. Not only does disrupted sleep threaten the peace of your relationship, it's also detrimental to your well-being. Sleep impacts every aspect of human physiology, whether that's cardiovascular or metabolic or mental health, said Dr. Nathaniel Watson, professor of medicine and co-director of the University of Washington Medicine Sleep Center. You have to be your own personal stalwart and protector of your sleep because that's how you present the best version of yourself to the world, he said. Luckily, the most common bed sharing problems are totally fixable, or at least totally up for a compromise. The problem: I like a firm mattress, he likes a softie. If you can't agree on one mattress you both like, Craig Fruchtman, owner of Craig's Beds in Midtown Manhattan, said the easiest solution was just buying two mattresses and pushing them together. Two twin XL mattresses end up being the same dimensions of a king mattress, and you can lay them side by side in the same bed frame. Just make sure to measure if you're buying from two different brands. Not all will be the same height, though in a pinch, risers can level the gap. Alternatively, you can top a firm mattress with a narrow foam or feather topper for the person who prefers things soft. Just don't do the reverse. If their bed's lumpy and they put something that's firm on top of it, it's just going to be that much lumpier, he said. The problem: I like it dark. She wants to keep the lights on. Any light can disrupt sleep, said Dr. Anna Krieger, a sleep medicine expert at New York Presbyterian and Weill Cornell Medical. Ideally, your bedroom should be dark for sleeping hours, which can be achieved using blackout curtains or shades. But if your partner will be waking up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night or climbing into bed slightly after you, you don't want her stumbling around blind. Dr. Krieger advises a compromise in the form of a low light underneath the bed or a motion-activated night light just bright enough for her to see and make her way. Beyond the bedroom, Dr. Krieger would also like to see more homes feature dimmers throughout. That period that surrounds bedtime, like an hour and a half before going to sleep, the light exposure needs to be minimized for best sleep, she said. Even if you're just unloading the dishwasher or brushing your teeth in bright lighting, you may struggle later to achieve a proper night's sleep. The problem: I'm a morning bird, she's a night owl. Most people's sleep cycles are hardwired into their bodies. If you're a night owl, you can possibly train yourself to sleep and rise earlier, but you'll probably never transform into a true morning bird, said Dr. Shelby Harris, a sleep specialist at the Albert Einstein School of Medicine and author of The Women's Guide to Overcoming Insomnia. And so forcing yourself as a couple to go to bed and rise at the same time just sets you up for resentment. Instead, she advises couples to consider cuddling or engaging in other romantic bedtime activities and then choosing their own adventure, whether it's drifting into slumber, or staying up with a book. As for waking on different schedules without disturbing each other, Dr. Harris suggests looking at alarm clocks designed for people with hearing impairment. Many rouse you with vibrations, either in the form of a flat device you slip under your pillow or a wristwatch. An Apple Watch can also do this, but at a much higher price. If one partner is willing to wear an eye mask, Wirecutter also recommends several sunrise alarm clocks that can awaken you with a very bright light. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times Business section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The problem: he likes to scroll before bed. Surely that's bad. It depends. Dr. Watson made it clear that staring at a screen before bed was ill-advised. Still, he acknowledged that what's a problem for one person is not necessarily a problem for another. Research shows that the blue wavelengths of light emanated from devices like laptops and cell phones can be stimulating, but for some people it doesn't cause sleep problems. It may also not be the blue light itself, but rather the type of content being digested that causes sleep disruption. If you or your partner insists on screens in the bed, Dr. Watson suggests limiting the blue light exposure by going into your phone settings to reduce it manually, or wearing blue light blocking glasses. But still, he echoes most sleep specialists' directive to keep the bed a place where nothing but sleep and sex take place. He said, "We want that when your head hits your pillow, your body knows definitely that now when I sleep. It's not like, oh, now is when I watch TV. Now is when I look at my phone. Now is when I have an engrossing hour-long conversation with my kid." The problem: I want our pet in bed with us. She does not. Unfortunately, your partner is probably right about this one. Many people don't realize that their cats or dogs are disturbing their sleep because they find it so cute and so lovely, Dr. Krieger said. This poses two problems. How do you train the animal to sleep outside the bed, and how do you train the human to sleep without the animal? People feel more comfortable when they have somebody in bed with them, Dr. Krieger said, even if that somebody is a pet. So, trying to feel safe in your own home environment, I think, is very important. One solution she suggests is to train your pet to sleep in its own bed in your line of sight. Even knowing it's in the room may bring the same comfort as having it close. The problem: one of us runs hot, the other runs cold. With many couples, there is a disparity in preferred temperature, but it's better to defer to the hot sleeper. A colder room is easier to deal with because you can always add extra clothing or have your own blankets, Dr. Krieger said. But it's very hard when people start to feel very warm at night because that affects sleep significantly. Many brands offer cooling mattresses, though Mr. Fruchtman points out that after you've pulled on a mattress protector and sheets, any purported benefits are usually insignificant. I tell customers, I don't think you're going to feel warm with this cooling mattress, but I don't necessarily think you're going to feel cool. Instead, experts suggest keeping the room cooler with air conditioning, and then opting for individualized bedding. Dr. Harris recommends the Scandinavian sleep method, recently popularized on social media, where each person uses their own blanket atop the same sheets. You can fold a duvet in half at night and pull it across the bed in the morning if you don't like the mix and match aesthetic, she adds. For the truly chilly person, an electric blanket might be a good investment, or it's not sexy for people, but wearing socks to sleep could help, she added. The problem: their constant tossing and turning wakes me up. Though restless movement can be a sign of a sleep disorder, some people are more restless within a spectrum of normal sleep, Dr. Krieger said. If you or your partner's movement is keeping the other awake, a slightly bigger bed may alleviate the issue, and one made from memory foam will have less motion transfer, Mr. Fruchtman said. But Mr. Fruchtman suggests looking not at the bed, but at the frame. They should consider this furniture and the weight of their furniture, making sure the mattress lays perfectly flat. When they lay flat, they don't move. So that could be a reason to buy an adjustable base or a base that's just really solid. The problem. Zzz. Among Dr. Harris's patients, snoring is a most common source of sleep disruption. It's snoring in bed that's something that's making them either wake up or have trouble falling asleep, she says. Snoring could be a sign of bigger health problems, but it could also be intermittent, aggravated by factors like allergies or drinking. Whatever it is, try not to hear it. A white noise machine can drown out quieter snoring sounds, but for a louder case, try combining the white noise machine with earplugs. Dr. Krieger recommends waterproof swimmer's earplugs for slightly better staying power. The problem. My partner and I just cannot sleep in the same bed. Then don't, Dr. Krieger said. There are different aspects of sleeping together, right? There's the physical or sexual kind of romantic involvement, and then there's sleep. Many couples actually improve their relationship when they choose to sleep apart, or sleep divorce, as the practice has come to be known. Some couples choose to sleep separately certain days of the week, or temporarily until one partner's sleep disorder has been resolved. It doesn't have to be all or nothing, Dr. Harris said. However long you're apart, though, she stresses the importance of making both sleep environments as equal as possible. If one person gets relegated just to the couch every night, that's a pretty sad experience, she said. Don't let conflicts derail renovations. Counselors, therapists, designers, and contractors offer tips for protecting a relationship while fixing up a home. By Rachel Wharton. A major home renovation can be hard on a relationship. The process includes such classic argument starters as ever-expanding timelines and budgets, choosing from a vast assortment of colors and materials, agreeing on a general vision and aesthetic, and the awkward dance of managing a team of strangers making a mess of your primary bathroom. So we asked experts, interior designers and contractors, marriage counselors and therapists, for tips on how to protect a relationship during a renovation. And don't forget rule number 1, said Alex Usharov, a partner in Gallery KBNY, a Manhattan design and build firm. If you're having serious marital problems, you probably shouldn't embark on a renovation, he said. It's not going to be good for anyone. Talk about everything. Aim for communications at every step of the process, starting with whether you really want or need to do a renovation at all, said Elizabeth Earnshaw, a licensed marriage therapist in Philadelphia. In her experience, said Miss Earnshaw, one of the partners is typically not fully invested in the process, and instead they just go along with it. Partners may also disagree on everything from whom to hire to whether they prefer a mid-century modern vibe or farmhouse. Ms. Earnshaw said the best way to navigate all these kinds of discussions was by allowing the other person to express their concern. Ms. Earnshaw recommends that couples also come to an agreement on whether it is the best time, as in not when someone is caring for a sick parent, or the best use of their money. Budget is the first thing the Houston interior designer Mary Patton brings up with potential clients, and couples should be discussing it well before they come to her, she said. How much can you spend, she said. Like, that's the ultimate question, and then we go backward from there. Ariane Belizaire, an interior designer in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, said it was also critical to agree on a hard finish line before adding tasks, especially if you're doing the work yourselves. That's where you get the money pit, she said. That's when you get to 3 years of it, never finished. It's a half-painted wall, you've ripped out the cabinet, and you never put it back. Go on a fact-finding mission. Ms. Usharov advises couples to go on a general fact-finding mission together before they begin. In this experience, most conflicts arise when both parties haven't taken the time to fully educate themselves on all the steps and all the pitfalls. If a designer or contractor won't take the time to talk to you through those issues before you pay them, he said, it's kind of a good sign not to go with them. You should make sure you and your partner have good chemistry with this professional too, said Erna Fierstein, a licensed therapist and marriage counselor in Manhattan, who has lived through many renovations with her husband. You'll have an intense relationship for the duration of the project and beyond, she said. Hannah Goldberg, an interior designer in Washington, D.C., said that researching and planning how you live without a bathroom, bedroom, or kitchen could also reduce friction. She often helps people set up temporary kitchens or plan through a new routine. Where are you going to make your coffee? Ms. Goldberg said. You don't want to eat out every night for a month on end. Choose a captain. Mr. Yuzharov recommends choosing one person to handle the day-to-day communication with a designer or contractor as the project progresses. It's more efficient and helps eliminate conflicting input, he said, but it also helps you avoid arguing in public, or worse, one person being humiliated. Ms. Patton also suggested getting a sign-off from the non-captain on decisions, even if that person insists that it's not necessary. It's like a prenuptial agreement about paint colors, she says. Let the pro mediate arguments. One of the stressful parts of renovation is that you have to make many, many choices, said Miss Fierstein, the Manhattan marriage counselor, referring to selections on hardware, sinks, or tiles, many of which require visits together to retail stores. If you can't decide on the choices, ask your contractor for an opinion, she said. Hill Rondero, head of Row House Studio in Charlotte, North Carolina, said most interior designers have been trained to help multiple parties find an elegant compromise. Ms. Rondero said that if she had one client who really wanted a green sofa and another who did not, she might suggest a linen sofa and green chairs, and then pick up a little more of the green with some strategically placed artwork. Now both people feel like, oh, this does feel like the room I thought it was, she said. If you're doing the work yourselves, you can nominate one person to be the tiebreaker on all these kinds of choices, Ms. Belizaire said. That's how you can stay partners who are in love, who will actually live in the house after you finish with a renovation, she said. Remember, it's just a renovation. Ms. Earnshaw, the therapist, said it was helpful to remember that stress, because of dust, noise, decisions, and delays, causes a real physiological response, and you should take steps to manage it. If you're not paying attention to that stress, you might become more withdrawn and aggressive to your partner, she said. Ms. Rondero usually tries making people laugh when things grow tense or awkward. If your biggest problem is that you can't get the sofa or you can't get the tile that you want, I think that's okay. She also said having a good bottle of wine or tequila on hand for nights or weekends wasn't the worst idea either. It's stressful, but gosh, if you're not enjoying it at the end of the day, what's it all for? She said. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the February 15th issue of the New York Times business section. We read from the New York Times business section every Thursday at 11 a.m. Your reader has been Jackie. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have the USA Today. Following that at 2 o'clock with episodes number 36 of Mark Twain by Ron Chernow. Stay with us for these readings and more. Just a quick note during this next 2 hours. The fire system here at the Radio Reading Service is being tested today as part of just a system-wide test. So if during the live broadcast you hear suddenly a loud beeping sound in the background, that is what it is. Do not be alarmed. It's not an issue with your receiver. It's more of just mandatory we have to do. But just wanted to give you the heads up. Stay with us though. Reading the USA Today is coming up soon.
The following program is intended for listeners who are blind,